So, for example, we can go back to Kennedy. I didn't know about him until I joined the Marine Corps and learned about him. General David Shoup, Shoup. He was the commandant of the Marine Corps from 1960 until New Year's Eve of 1963. So the typical 4-year term that a commandant serves. And he was a Medal of Honor recipient from World War II. Totally badass guy. I mean, this guy had taken a shot to the leg and had a bullet graze his neck when he was fighting Imperial Japan, the Imperial Japanese Army in World War II. And so anyway, got a Medal of Honor for that. He later becomes the commandant of the Marine Corps, and he was opposed to the Bay of Pigs invasion, actually. He had several arguments with Kennedy, but he wasn't able to convince Kennedy that it was going to be a bad idea. Kennedy just had to learn the hard way and get embarrassed and humiliated by the Soviet Union and by Castro. And sure enough, that's exactly what happened. Then he criticized the escalation. He said about 500 advisors that Eisenhower left in Vietnam. That number escalated to about 15,000 by the time of Kennedy's assassination. And in that time, as troops were more and more being sent into Vietnam, General Shoup said, hey, this is dragging us into a fight that we have absolutely no business being in. We shouldn't be doing this. And Kennedy didn't listen. Kennedy had his strategic Hamlet program, created all these little villages throughout South Vietnam, most of which were underfunded, no electricity, no running water. And it was Ngo Dinh Diem and his henchmen that hoarded the resources that were given to him by the U.S. They weren't being distributed to the Buddhist population of South Vietnam. And that created a lot of resentment. That's ultimately what led to them overthrowing Ngo Dinh Diem. So lots of corruption in South Vietnam. Then the use of Agent Orange, right? Operation Ranch Hand started with Kennedy. That killed tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of innocent people. Even a lot of Vietnam vets came back and had to file VA claims because they ingested Agent Orange and it destroyed their lungs. And it's horrible. It's like they were like today's burn pits, or you can think of Agent Orange is like the latter day burn pit, essentially, in terms of just how deleterious it was. And so then, of course, after he retired, after General Shoup left active duty, because he left right as Lyndon B. Johnson was taking power, his criticisms of the Vietnam War continued. In fact, they escalated. He became one of the staunchest critics of the Vietnam War effort. He went around college campuses encouraging kids to avoid conscription, and he was vicious in his criticism, not just of the Vietnam War effort, but he actually expanded to criticize the military-industrial complex in general. And he was right about everything. I mean, it's insane just how right he was. If he were alive today, I mean, had he lived, for example, to see, well, one, I'd argue Reagan's mishandling of Lebanon, but two, had he lived to see the Iraq War, the occupation of Afghanistan, the bombing of Libya, the bombing of Syria, if he had lived to see what's happening to the Palestinians now, there's no question he's tossing and turning in his grave, right? That he'd be walking around with a keffiyeh screaming from the river to the sea. And it's the thing is, though, despite the fact that he was right, Lyndon B. Johnson didn't listen. He ordered the FBI to wiretap and harass General David Shoup instead, and Nixon continued that. So this guy was a war hero who would risk his life for the United States just for his country to turn on him. And when he dared to stand up and speak the truth. And so, and then you have a general who goes off like that, civilian leadership will retaliate in the worst kind of way. That's exactly what happened to Vietnam. You flooded, the standards were dropped. You had a lot of horrible people who joined the military. So now the image of the military is tarnished. You've got wife beaters, drug addicts, and just other just very, very low quality individuals who are not only joining, but being retained. And now you've got a culture that's very toxic. And that's bad, right? This is why General Lewis Wilson, when he became the commandant, made it very clear. He's like, hey, we have to get in step. And it's like, even if it's the sergeant major and I left, we'll purge every fat body and drug addict out of the Marine Corps. And he really put his foot down on that, much the way the current commandant kind of did with like the hazing culture that came out of the War on Terror. And so with that being said, it's just like, that's the frustrating part, is you can have someone who knows what they're talking about and who is almost like a Socratean or Christ-like figure, whatever you want to call it, that dissenter. But how do you convince somebody to have a conscience when they just refuse to have one? That I can't answer that question, and it's frustrating.
Yeah, it is. It's really dark that the only solace you can take from that is the examples like with Shoup or Smedley Butler or stuff like that, is that it doesn't really matter who it comes from. Like there's no level you could ascend to. There's no credentials you could have. There's no experience you could show to prove to people that, hey, maybe making the moral choice is the right thing to do. If that doesn't spring from them internally. It just doesn't. And like with your example with General Shoup and everything, I was thinking that it's really unfortunate that the lion's share of statues we build are the people who win wars, not people who prevent them, when the people who prevent them should probably get more recognition. Like for example, like one of speaking of that era and incidents that took place, like with the Cuban Missile Crisis, I can't even remember the name of the Russian guy who refused to fire the missile, like preventing a nuclear war. That guy should be like a household name. I think the story's pretty popular, but I don't know. Maybe it's like a really hard to pronounce Russian name. Maybe that's why. Maybe that's why. I don't know. I really don't know. But yeah, stuff like that are things that we really should focus a lot on, because you were talking about the sympathy aspect of it when you were mentioning how more people than I care to think about just have, it's not even that they don't have, sympathy for what's happening in Gaza. They like it. They like it. They think it's great. They cheer for it. They want more. And it's like, they haven't learned their lesson yet. It's got to continue. And what's been interesting over the last 24 hours is I have seen from both sides or all sides of the political spectrum infinitely more sympathy for Donald Trump's bleeding ear than I have for thousands of charred Palestinian bodies. That's just true. It's just people care a lot more about that, a lot more about what happened to Trump. Not that I'm saying it was a good thing. It was obviously not, but just where are our priorities here? Like why do you? And I think we talked about this when you came on the Left Wing show with me and John a few months back. How whenever international tragedies happen, the reporting is always the same way. It'll be 15 people died in an earthquake in Thailand, and 2 of them were American. Like, oh my God, there are 2 Americans, and we care more, as if that means anything. That an American death actually hurts us more. People you didn't know existed. You didn't know they were American. You didn't know they were in a foreign country. You just heard that someone in your tribe died, and all of a sudden you care a lot more about it. And I don't know. This is what makes talking about international incidents so difficult when it comes to American politics. Because I would talk about, how Palestine, how our dealings with the Israeli government and with Palestine was hurting Biden. Like he was losing a lot of support for, obvious reasons. But for the most part, like the vast majority of voters don't vote on foreign policy issues at all, no matter how bad they get. If you ask people like what their top 5 issues are, like 10% maybe are going to say, what's going on with, with Gaza. So it is just pretty depressing, but we can't, you mentioned how we can't change people's morality. Like we can't, but what can we change? Like in what way can we make people, like, even if they don't care about it on a moral level, like a way that can persuade them that does affect them somehow, like outside of their humanity?
Well, what I would say to that is, with a situation like the genocide of the Palestinian people, as it continues to grow, expand, and escalate, because war is not, as you see in a video game, it develops fairly slowly, right? So, for example, when Adolf Hitler was beginning to commit genocide against the Jewish people, right? That started in 1933, but the U.S. didn't give 2 shits, pardon my French, until about 1941, right? Then, and only that was only because of Pearl Harbor getting hit. Then suddenly FDR says, "Oh, okay, now we have to get involved." It's like, okay, so you've got hundreds of thousands, millions of these people who have been killed around the world. And again, I'm not saying we carry the weight of the world on our shoulders, but there's got to be a limit to where we say, hey, we as a human race can't tolerate this, right? And so when it comes to something like that, I think the only way people are going to care is if, say, Israel starts to get overrun, they want to, for example, push into southern Lebanon, and it's going to be 10 times worse than 2006 was. It'll make 2006 look like a fight on a playground compared to what's going to come to them if they actually do try to push into Lebanon again. So say Israel starts to get overrun, we see protests in Egypt against King Abdullah, in Jordan against King Abdullah, against El-Sisi in Egypt, both of which are supported heavily by the United States. And so it's kind of like a second Arab Spring that's forming. And the question is, how long will the United States try to sort of occupy the Middle East, or the Levant specifically, by proxy? Because at some point, it's either, okay, you are going to have to either commit troops directly to this, and in order to defend Israel, you're going to have to put foreign boots on the ground, or you're just going to let the whole thing collapse. And I don't know. I tend to think that the mothers of America are going to care more about the safety of their sons and daughters than they're going to care about defending a segregationist apartheid state in the Middle East that doesn't historically give too much of a hoot about U.S. troops. Like when, for example, USS Liberty got bombed, or often a lot of folks don't know about the bombing of the Marine Corps barracks. This is actually something my mom also lived through when she was in Lebanon. So did my uncle. My grandmother was there as well. The Iranians, the ones that carried it out. But what wasn't known at the time was that Israel was actively funneling weapons to Iran under the table in what became known as the Iran-Contra scandal. And there was even a book written by a Mossad agent named Victor Ostrowski, who argued that Mossad knew it was going to happen, but they let it happen. They wanted it to happen because the Marines in Beirut stood up to them after the Sabra and Shatila massacre. And so another instance of, the book is really called By Way of Deception, by the way. And so another instance where they don't really care about us. They think that they're God's chosen people and that they can do whatever they want. It's like the 21st century version of the Manifest Destiny. That's what it reminds me of. Kind of like when
it's exactly the same. It's exactly the same.
Yeah, this belief, like, we're God's chosen people. We can do, like, James K. Polk taking California, Arizona, Nevada, New Mexico, Texas, Utah, Colorado, parts of Wyoming, and then saying, oh, we're God's chosen people. We can steal this land from the Mexican community. We can steal this land from all the Native Americans. Ultimately, we're picked by God to occupy this real estate. Right? This is what they thought. And with the Israelis, they have the same view of the Palestinians. Oh, well, we're God's chosen people. They're not. They're these wicked, savage, crazy people. They're not right with God. We were the ones chosen by God. So, and we're indigenous to the land and whatever. So they think that they have the dominion to just do whatever they want, basically. And it's the sad thing is, people generally only care about themselves and their next of kin. But I think that if the U.S. gets deeper into this, gets dragged more into this, then you're going to see more, I think, of a reaction. You're going to see more of an uproar. I think the anti-war protests that would come out of, like, direct intervention by the U.S. would be bigger. They would dwarf Vietnam, especially because we have social media today, whereas our predecessors in the 60s did not.
Yeah, that's true. It's like, I agree 100% that as long as you can think about these things abstractly, people are going to be less likely to take it seriously. That's just that's the human condition, unfortunately, that, like how I mentioned earlier, that people don't generally vote on foreign policy. And there is one exception to that. And that's what Alex mentioned. And that's if there are actual Americans dying in a war, because then they'll start to ask, okay, why is my cousin dead? All right. Why am I seeing people I know not coming back? Why is my friend missing an arm? And they start asking these questions of like, okay, well, what are we getting out of this? And the answer is, in this case, Israel can take over a tiny stretch of land next to the Mediterranean Sea. Not good enough. Sorry, that's not going to work. So that would be one way to focus it out. Oh man, there's something you mentioned I forgot to write down. I have a horrible memory when it comes to stuff that I can't want to talk about. But shit. Yeah, God, I don't want to forget it. But I wanted a couple other things too. The Manifest Destiny thing was a perfect example. It's so good. I'm angry I never thought of it. Like that is such a good example right there, because it's literally the same thing. The only difference is that ours is just kind of made out of whole cloth. if anything, like at least like the Israelis from the river to the sea, I'll get to that too, river to sea, but that they can like at least pretend to point to like an ancient prophecy or something. No, we just like, nope, we're here. It's ours now. I remember when I was in college, we were going over, it was like in Western Civ 1 or something like that. And our professor asked us like, okay, so this Manifest Destiny thing, how did the Americans know that they had this Manifest Destiny? And I was like, well, they didn't. Like, hey, you're right. They didn't. They just literally made it up. And it's weird that Manifest Destiny doesn't have a more negative connotation, because it really doesn't. It's just, oh yeah, that was just what we were supposed to do, from sea to shining sea. And everyone kind of rolls around with, oh, Vietnam, that's what it was. I don't remember what you said, but I wanted to bring it up. But how the war was obviously wrong, like comically, hilariously evil, and we got nothing out of it. I remember talking to someone I knew a long time ago. I went to what are they called, VFW. I don't remember where I was there. It was like a meeting place or something, and I went to the men's room at the VFW, and the urinals had pictures of Jane Fonda in the urinals, and right, and most people didn't even know what was going on. They're like, who is this lady, and why is her picture in the urinal? And that was Jane Fonda. Why? And it's like, if you don't know this shit, you'd be confused by it. So for those of you who don't know what I'm referencing, back in the 70s, Jane Fonda, maybe the 60s, I don't know what the actual year it took place. I'm guessing the 70s. It was protesting the Vietnam War. And they called her Hanoi Jane. And because she went over to Vietnam and they took pictures of her, sitting on Viet Cong anti-aircraft weapons and stuff and saying that, she's a traitor to this nation. And I was telling this to someone I knew years ago, and he was talking about, I don't think it's cool that, Jane Fonda did that. Because, look, I get that you don't support the war, but American troops are over there dying, and that's not something that you do. I said, look, let me break this down for you. Okay. So the country of Vietnam was being colonized, literally colonized by France. Like, I'm not saying that in a flippant way or a parable and no, it was a literal French colony that had appointed a puppet king, like a monarchy, to rule over these people, to extract their wealth and to subjugate them under the boots of a Western European nation. And so the people of Vietnam revolted. They said, no, we don't like this anymore. We're going to revolt against this Western nation and try to take our country back for ourselves. And we're going to decide to make a communist government. That's what we want. And the Americans said, no, sorry, we're not letting that slide. We're going to come in and defend the French colonial, instituted monarchy and everything like that, and try to uphold the system that the people of Vietnam don't want. And so we're now, not only we're going to do that, we're going to draft American boys and send them over to fight and die in a jungle to do this for us at our behest. Like, they don't want to. They've made that very clear. They're protesting all the time and saying this is unjust. We're going to do it anyway. We're going to kill Vietnamese people unjustly. We're going to kill Americans unjustly. And I'm supposed to be mad at Jane Fonda here? Like, what? Why would I be mad at her for this? Like, that's far more noble. And look, it's easy to say that I wasn't around in 1968 and being drafted into the Vietnam War, like to go fight an unjust war. And look, fine, like, I get it. Like, you don't want to go to prison. That could ruin the rest of your life. You don't want to, risk crippling any future, and plus, especially with the environment at the time, you could have been, outcast by your family and stuff. I'm not defending like the actions of it, but I get why people did it. I have a hell of a lot more respect for who did dodge, though. Like, I do. Like, people who ran, I was like, yeah, fine, that's the moral thing to do. Which is also why I hate when people shit on Trump although look, for dodging the war. Yeah, look, he shouldn't have been able to do it the way he did it. Like, he got to dodge it because he was a rich guy. But on the list of things that I'm mad at Trump for, dodging the Vietnam War is not high. Sorry, it's just not very high on that. And one more thing I want to mention too, where you talked about how one of the things that the Israelis like to talk about is that how we're indigenous to this land. Did you know the DNA tests are illegal in Israel? You can't buy them there.
I didn't know that.
Yeah. Say what?
I did know that. Yeah.
That's true. Why are they illegal, Alex? Why would they do something like that?
Well, yeah, because often people make claims about DNA to establish indigeneity. I know that with many Native American societies here in the United States, they don't do DNA. It's about having a cultural tie to the land. And so with many in Israel, certainly those that are Ashkenazi Jewish, the idea is that a lot of their DNA would be European. It wouldn't establish that there's any sort of long-standing tie they have to the Levant. And so making the DNA test illegal essentially prevents anybody from making a DNA-based argument.
Yeah.
And so,
yeah. That's so. I want to tackle both those points. So, Yeah, it's like a lot of the defense that people will have on why the Israelis should be allowed to, just massacre as many people as they want with no repercussions, no questions asked, no strings attached, is because they have like a direct, they are direct descendants from the original inhabitants of this land. They claim that they're the indigenous population. DNA does not show that, like it doesn't, and